Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Jasmine Singer.
And this is Marianne Sullivan.
Thanks for joining us this week. Marianne's guest is Tyson-Lord Gray, who is an attorney, professor, minister, and a pretty great activist for both humans and animals.
Yeah, really kind of an amazing interview. And of course, on the Flock bonus segment this week, I'll be continuing my conversation with Tyson-Lord Gray. As always, if you're a Flock member, you'll get the link to that bonus segment in your email on the Tuesday after this podcast goes up, or you can always find it on the Flock Facebook group. If you're not a member of the Flock yet and you can afford it, you can join for $10 a month at ourhenhouse.org/donate.
And if you are a member of the Flock, and thank you if you are, please also join us for our first Flock Friday Zoom calls, which are once a month, you guessed it, the first Friday of the month at 4 p.m. Eastern or 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And on these calls, we focus on how to be better activists, how to take care of ourselves and one another. And we always have some really inspiring guests, many of whom are former podcast guests. So if you're a member of the Flock, be sure to check out the Flock Facebook group for updates or write to us at info@ourhenhouse.org. We've also started one-on-one sessions with me on Zoom for our Flock members. So I always have a few sessions each month. If you're a Flock member, you can sign up for it. If you want to find out how to do that, please email Jen at jen@ourhenhouse.org. I love doing those. It's really fun.
You know, First Fridays used to be a Catholic thing.
Oh, really?
It probably still is a Catholic thing. I'm just not a Catholic
That is
anymore.
funny.
I don't really remember what they were, but there were always these special services on First Fridays. So, you know, that's kind of the same thing we do. And also, don't a lot of towns have something once a month and it's called First
Yes,
something?
like a little
First
celebration. It's usually First Friday. Yeah, they had that when we were
Is it?
when
I
we
don't
were
know.
when we were in Portland for 6 months when you were visiting professor of animal
Yeah.
law at the
Yeah.
Center for Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark. They had First Fridays. It was always fun. And it was like a free market. So I just remember like trading things I happened to have on with like, oh, those are cool sunglasses. Let's switch.
Yeah.
Or like maybe for you, this sounds a little like 1970 was. I don't know. But that's how I imagine 1970.
Portland is a little bit like the 1970s.
Yeah. So I am currently sipping on my drive-through Dunkin' Donuts coffee, my oat milk latte. And I was just drinking it. I was thinking, I don't like this. Why am I drinking it? But I'm drinking it because it is providing me like a type of jolt, a type of medicine that I need because I was driving past the
Because you're a drug addict.
Because I'm a drug addict.
That's basically the thing here. Caffeine is a drug and you cannot stay awake without it.
Well, that's true. But I also, since we're coming out of COVID times, I don't know if that's an accurate way of putting it, but because things are shifting.
Everybody listening to this is now knocking on wood.
Right. I'm knocking on it.
And if you're not, please do so.
I'm knocking on IKEA particle board, which is very close to wood. But I've been sort of treating myself to the coffee at the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through for the last, however long I've lived here in the Catskills, which is like 8 months, because it's a drive-through and it's right here and they have oat milk. And so I've been enjoying that.
Your big outing of the day.
Yeah.
The exciting moment.
My big outing. And I have to say, even though I am so grateful for it, I am over it. I'm really ready to have some good coffee out in the world again. But, that being said, oat milk has come such a long way. And speaking of oat milk, Oatly is definitely having quite a moment. I mean, it has been for a while. One thing I really appreciate about Oatly is that it has this really overt animal rights messaging. When I was living in LA, I would see these billboards all over the place on buses and on benches with like very strong animal rights messaging. That is cool. So I'm thrilled that Oatly has now gone public. And it actually had a giant start. It had an initial public offering raising $1.4 billion. Its share prices spiked by 30% on its first day, which is phenomenal. And it is actually just as phenomenal as the recent successes that this company has seen. It made approximately $421 million in 2020, which is more than double what it got the year before. And it recently just last year got $200 million investment from a group of investors which included Oprah Winfrey. So if Oprah Winfrey is in, you're good. I actually did get a little bit of it. I don't have a lot of money for this kind of thing, but I like to have a small little cute portfolio on my Fidelity account. My portfolio is actually a really cool extension of a lot of my belief systems. So I have some of the vegan EFT stock and some other things that I feel really good about. So I really like that I get to actually invest in a dairy-free future. If any company has mainstreamed dairy-free living, it is Oatly. It's just phenomenal to me what is happening, especially when you think about they had a Super Bowl ad in 2020, like just huge, massive steps that it's taking. And this is on the coattails of Beyond Meat's very successful IPO, which had stock prices spike up to 163% a couple years ago. So it's really cool. Like, this is very, very good news.
Well, I, of course, have no money in it because I am useless at investing. I don't know whether that will ever change, but I do really like it. So that's good too. I think oat milk is my favorite milk, and Oatly might be though they all do kind of taste the same. I'm not going to deny it, but Oatly is one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they invented oat milk, but I think they might have, and they were certainly the first one I came across, and then a lot of other companies started making it too. So good. Who knew? Who knew that you could do that with oats?
I mean, it is funny. You can milk like anything, right? Like you could probably milk this IKEA desk that I'm like IKEA desk milk is probably the next big invention.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a great idea.
Okay, maybe not. All right. Well, so maybe you're not investing in Oatly, but you are certainly investing in the future of animal law, and you're most.
Oh, nice segue. Nice segue.
I can do that because I've had my Dunkin' Donuts coffee, so I'm alive. So anyway, you did have a recent animal law podcast drop, and I wanted to check in with you about it because I know that you've been pretty excited about it.
Yeah, no, this is a little bit of a change of pace for the animal law podcast. I mean, not totally. Usually what I do is I interview a lawyer who is actually litigating a current case. But this time I interviewed Karen Bradshaw, and she is not a litigator. She is, in fact, a professor, and she teaches at the law school at Arizona State University. And she wrote this book, which I might have mentioned before, I'm not sure. It's called Wildlife as Property Owners. It's getting quite a bit of play in the animal law world. And it just comes from a completely different direction. I love it when somebody does something that just kind of opens your brain in a new direction. And she has expertise in property law and estates and trust law. And, obviously that has a little to do with animals because people set up pet trusts or whatever, but I never thought of having a lot to do with animals. But she is theorizing that because we are, biodiversity is crashing around us. So this is probably she characterizes it, I think, as a problem even greater than climate change, though, of course, they are kind of completely related to each other. But, we can't live without all of the other animals on the planet. And so she has this idea, which she lays out in this book, of ways that individuals can maybe put their money into trusts and actually the beneficiaries of the trust, really the owners of the trust, would be animals. Just a classic trust, and it would have a trustee who would have to run the trust and care for the land to the benefit of the animals. All right, I can't get into any more detail. You'll have to listen to the episode because it's very cool. She's a really interesting person, and she has a lot of interesting ideas. And as I said, I just love a new idea. Mm-hmm. She says that she doesn't see this kind of animals as property owners as an alternative to animal rights theory. She sees it as a yes and. It's another way that we can move legally to benefit animals, and it's very cool. I hope people check it out.
The Animal Law Podcast goes up the last Wednesday of every month, and you can subscribe to it in a separate feed. And I hope that you also follow us on all of the social medias at Our Hen House, because we will always announce the newest episode. That sounds great, Marianne. I'm really excited to hear it. And I'm also excited to hear your chat with our guest today, Dr. Tyson-Lord Gray, because this is a man who wears many hats. He is currently a research associate at the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, and he is an adjunct professor at NYU Stern Business School. He is also a lawyer and previously worked at Richmond Law Group, where he focused on holding industries accountable to environmental regulations and protecting consumers from greenwashing via false advertising and deceptive food labeling. As if that weren't enough, he holds a master's in divinity from Morehouse School of Religion and preaches within the Baptist tradition. A passionate vegan who serves on the board of Mercy for Animals and Greened the Church, his research lies at the intersections of environmental ethics, critical race theory, and public policy. Dr. Tyson-Lord Gray will be joining Marianne right after this. If you like what you're listening to, and I hope you do, then please consider taking a minute out of your day today to leave us a friendly review. You can do it on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or Stitcher or on Facebook or wherever you listen to podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. The more we get out there, the more our henhouse will be in front of people's eyeballs when they're putting in search terms in their podcasts, and the more we could join forces together to elevate the voices of the animals and change the world for them. So thank you so much in advance for leaving us a friendly review.
Welcome to our henhouse, TL.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you today.
I am thrilled to have you, because one of the reasons is that you are that very rare person who you have very deep roots in environmentalism and have focused on that a lot, but you also seem to just get it about the worth of individual animals, which too often people in the environmental world they understand the implications of factory farming, the environmental implications, but they don't have that perspective. Do you agree with me that this is a little bit rare in that movement? And how do you explain it? I'm going to ask you to explain a lot of things today.
So, I absolutely agree. And I think that oftentimes the work in animal rights and food justice and environmental rights is siloed, right? So you have these individual communities kind of working in these spaces on their issues and rarely seeing the interconnection between the three and the four. And so I think one of the benefits I have is being not only a ethicist, but also being an attorney, being a minister, being an activist. And so it allows me to be situated in multiple spaces and see these connections sometimes a bit more clearly.
Yeah, you really do wear a lot of hats, as I was saying. And so among them is the fact that you are a minister. And I kind of like to start off with that a little bit and how it affects all of these other issues. Can you tell us a little bit first, just a little introductory piece about the tradition that you come from and maybe some of its attitudes towards animals?
Sure. I think, it's great if you want to start there because that's actually where my journey started. So I was licensed and ordained in ministry back in 96. So I've been preaching for over 20 years now, National Baptist Convention, and really saw myself in the lineage of Dr. King and the Ralph David Abernathy's and individuals who were at the intersection of faith, but also social justice and political activism. And so really wanted to have impact in the real world. And I think it was the connection with social justice and environmental justice that really allowed me to then not only see environmental issues as environmental issues, but also issues that affect minority communities, issues that affect the health of minority populations, looking at the ways in which animals were impacted by animal agriculture. And so I think that, for me, this really all comes down to a moral, ethical argument, which I remember Al Gore in his 2007 Inconvenient Truth said, climate change is an ethical issue. It's a moral issue. And I completely agree with that. And that is really what has fueled my passion in this area for the last 20 years now.
I mean, this is my favorite topic in the world. So I think it's obvious to a lot of people listening to this podcast that these issues are all interconnected and all important ethical issues, but it's sure not obvious to everyone. And let's go back a little bit to your tradition, because I always find fascinating that I think, and maybe you will convince me otherwise, that attitudes towards animals and our duties to them are just, no matter what religion or tradition you are in, we just don't find resonance for the deep feelings that we have about them. Have you found that to be true? Do you find it to be shifting? And why? Why is it?
Right. So I definitely think that there is a disconnect, and I can really only speak from the African American tradition because that's where I'm situated at. And I think that oftentimes, specifically when we look at African American communities, it's because we are bombarded with so many issues and so many injustices that oftentimes animal rights just kind of falls to the bottom of the list, right? We're thinking about criminal justice reform. We're looking at prison incarceration. We're looking at high rates of, education, lack of education in communities. And so oftentimes, you don't have African American churches, African American communities as vocal about animal rights issues simply because we're actually fighting for our own lives, right? We're talking about Black Lives Matter, and we're talking about issues that are relevant to human lives still. But I definitely think that there is that undercurrent there. I'm actually on the board of an organization called Green the Church. It's housed out in Oakland, California, Reverend Ambrose Carroll, and the mission is to get churches involved in environmental justice, food injustice issues, issues around sustainability and weatherizing buildings. And so it is an initiative that is connecting environmental issues, animal rights issues to social justice issues within Black communities.
Oh, I love to hear that. Sadly, I mean, that's obviously true that Black churches and Black communities have a lot going on. And the harder people's individual lives are, the more they have to focus on those issues. But it's certainly not just true of Black churches and Black communities.
Absolutely.
It's true of everybody. So it's hard to believe that Jesus, if belief in Jesus is part of one's tradition, would be okay with what we're doing. It makes no sense. This could not possibly be true that there is a God who created these animals so we could do this to them. Do people just, like everybody else, just refuse to think about this issue?
Yeah, I think that is really what it comes down to. I'm often reminded of a book by Carol J. Adams. It's called The Sexual Politics of Meat. And in that book, she uses this term called the absent referent. And essentially, she talks about the ways in which we look at meat, not as the dead carcass of an animal, which is what it is, but we look at it as chicken nuggets. We look at it as sausage links. We give it these different names. And so that way, we're not really thinking of, this piece of, sirloin as, dead carcass, right? And it's that ability to separate the torture, the inhumane treatment, the slaughter of animals from that hamburger that shows up on your plate. And I think when you're able to do that successfully, as we know that marketing campaigns and huge, companies that produce meat have been able to do, then you end up with a population that is able to justify the treatment of animals in factory farms that is just completely inhumane. And I don't think most people would be okay with if they actually were to see it visibly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to keep asking you the same question or focusing on the same issue, but it really just does astound me that churches in particular, who really are there to guide people for ethical behavior, have that same disconnect. So many people in the church, people who are otherwise incredibly wonderful human beings. That's what makes me so crazy. But It does happen. But you seem to be really putting yourself in the position of and being very good at being a bridge builder, finding, still working with those people who don't yet get it about maybe environmentalism, maybe about animals, and working within churches where people are focused on other social justice issues, but haven't awakened to this one yet. Basically, how do you do it? How do you not lose your temper? How do you keep talking to people, even though, things that you care about so deeply, just aren't resonating with them?
Right. I think at the core, it's really understanding that churches, religions, whether it's a mosque or a temple, individuals have a way of prioritizing the issues that they think are important and oftentimes having a blind spot to others. And so, I don't approach pastors or, leaders of other faiths with any additional expectation than I would anyone else in the population. And that's because I realize the ways in which religion has been used to fuel wars, the ways in which religion has been used to ostracize individuals of same-sex orientations, the way religion has been used to keep women in a lesser position than men. And so I realize that even within religion, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of work that has to be done. And I think oftentimes it's just being able to resonate with individuals who legitimately want to do the right thing, and then being able to communicate them the reason that this is, a moral issue, right? The reason that the treatment of animals in factory farms, the reason that animals being abused and being, subjected to suffering is problematic for our own moral and ethical conscious. And when people are able to see that, I think that oftentimes they get on board. But we also have to fight against a societal social construct that has normalized meat eating. It has normalized, animals in zoos. It has normalized animals as pets and vivisection and scientific research. There's an entire documentary called Earthling. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but
I am very familiar with it. I've never managed to get through it.
It's a difficult
I'm
one to watch.
ashamed to admit, but I'm very familiar with it. And I do know it's responsible for a lot of people just suddenly having that wake up call.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think what's great about that documentary is it goes through and it shows the way in which we utilize animals as pets, the way we use them as clothing, the way we use them as food. And it just paints this picture of the way in which, speciesism, right? The idea that humans are more important than other species mirrors racism, mirrors sexism. And I think it's when people are able to make those connections that we actually see then the changes that are necessary to move society forward.
I know that we're dealing with the religion side of your multifaceted career, and I know that you do some preaching. Do you ever preach about this issue to people who aren't on board yet? And what kind of reaction do you get?
Absolutely. I'm often preaching a lot during April because that's Earth Month and I get a lot of invitations. And so I always connect our reverence for God and our reverence for our faith back to the fact that God has created, right, the earth. God created all things. And how do we then love and respect and have reverence for a higher being and yet pollute oceans, pollute the atmosphere, harm beautiful animals, right? There's all of this diversity within the species. And how do we justify then the torture of these different species and the eradication of many, right? We think about endangered species because of carbon that we put out into the atmosphere and how it's changing the climate in so many places. And so I think all of that is connected to our faith.
Yeah. And what kind of reaction do you get? And do you ever really go there about, maybe you should think about what you're eating?
Absolutely. And typically afterwards, I have people come up to me and they're like, I never really thought about that. And, you're absolutely right. Like this is, here in the text, right? I never thought about it. And I point out, that there are prophets who lived off of vegan diets, right? Agrarian diets. So I'll explicitly say, you realize we don't have to eat meat to survive, right? Like we could survive healthy off of a plant-based diet, right? This is the way God created our actual human bodies, that we don't have to eat meat. And so, when people hear that, they're like, oh, I never really thought about that. And then what I find specifically, again, within African-American churches, within African-American communities, is they say, you know what? This is probably the reason why I have, diabetes. This is probably why I have high blood pressure, right? If I were to go vegan, I probably would lose some weight, right? Like obesity is connected to our diets, right? Realizing that, a lot of the health issues that our community faces are as a result of a unhealthy and non-nutritious diet, which also connects then to other social systemic issues within minority communities when it comes to food justice and individuals living in food deserts, right? Not having access to fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. So getting their food from local bodegas and getting things that are, not healthy, don't have the same nutritional rate. So you have communities where you have high obesity, but you have low nutrition because the food that you're eating is just not healthy. So you're gaining weight because you're eating a lot of sugar, you're eating a lot of processed foods, but you're actually not getting healthy as a result. So a lot of these issues, like I said, it's the intersectionality of issues that when people start to see that, they say, oh, wow, I see now, how my diet could actually affect other issues in my life.
Yeah, and actually, I think that as we've seen, Black veganism, which is kind of a movement in and of itself,
absolutely,
is probably the most vibrant force within veganism right now. It's where a lot is going on, but it is mostly health related, and that's great. It's great for people that they should be healthier, and it's great for animals that I'm sure they prefer not to be eaten, regardless of the reason.
Absolutely.
But I guess one can't help but hope that also as it becomes a more mature movement and has such vibrancy, that people will start to see those interconnections of it's not just for me, it's for the planet. And it's not just for the planet, it's for every one of these luscious, beautiful little animals. And do you see that happening? Do you expect it to happen? And how are you promoting that happening?
So at this point, and I think it is early in terms of seeing Black veganism become a thing, so to speak, And there are previous, historically, right, we know that the Nation of Islam was vegan, and they have always not eaten pork and things like that. So there are within, Black history communities and spaces where veganism was a thing. I think that currently when we look at what's happening, the focus really is more so on health, right? And I think it has to do with, just prioritizing, right? So oftentimes I sit on the board for Mercy for Animals, and it's an organization where we advocate for, less cruelty to animals. Obviously, we're trying to change our food system to a plant-based food system. But oftentimes when we're having conversations about how do we target new demographics, how do we broach this conversation, one of the things I say is you have to meet people where they are, right? You have to meet people with the issues that matter to them. And I think that one of the best ways to really address this in minority communities right now is to focus on the health issue. I don't think it's really advantageous to argue. It's almost dangerous, I would say, to argue for the rights of animal lives when we're in the era of Black Lives Matter, where most African Americans are thinking, well, what about our lives, right? The fact that we can't walk down the street safe, right? The fact that we're having to worry about flashing lights behind us if we're driving because we don't know who we're going to encounter and what that encounter is going to look like or end up like. And so I think that when you're dealing with a situation where there's such systemic racism and there's such heightened conversation around Black lives, to argue, animal lives matter is really to almost come across as being out of touch, right? But when you put that within the conversation of, Black Lives Matter, absolutely. But Black Lives Matter also is affected by poor health, poor nutrition, poor education, prison incarceration. All of these things are part of Black Lives Matter. And so how do we then broaden that conversation and also think about diet, also think about nutrition, also think about animal rights within the context of Black Lives Matter? And I think that that's the inroad for that conversation with African American communities. And at the end of the day, I'm a pragmatist philosophically. So the goal is always the same, but whatever path or vehicle that it takes to get there, I think that that's the win.
Right. I always like to say, if you can just get the meat out of people's ears and out of their lives, then they can hear you when you talk about animals. Because I hear what you're saying about, you don't want to be, especially as a white person, you don't want to be preaching to people who have those kinds of problems and social problems. But at the same time, loads of Black people care about animals a lot. And we don't want to discount the fact that everybody's capable of caring about animals and underestimate what people are capable of having compassion for. And, of course, everyone is, because most people do care about animals. They just do such bad things to them. So let's talk a little bit more about the food issue, because food security is obviously a hugely important issue for you. You've done a lot of work within that space. And so for you, what are the connections between food insecurity and veganism? And I kind of like to deal with this both on a local view and a global view. But let's start a little bit with local. What are the barriers? I mean, let's say there is that person out there who really wants to do the right thing about animals, who is living a very tough life, has a couple of jobs, and lives in a neighborhood where there's not much food available. I'm listing all the barriers. I was going to ask you that.
No, you're absolutely on point, right? There are access barriers, right? In terms of not only availability, right? So being able to find these options, whether they're plant-based food options or whether they're economic barriers, right? Like, can they then afford these other options in terms of what's available? I do think that we're seeing a turn now where we're seeing a much more acceptance of veganism. So you're seeing places like Burger King come out with, the Bear Burger Whopper, right? And you're seeing, these restaurants that are making vegan options available, which I think is amazing because it's normalizing the fact that you don't have to, eat meat, right? You can do a vegan option. But I do think that in terms of, eating at home and shopping, I have the benefit of, being in a city where I can, access a lot of plant-based material. So I have, plant-based meatballs. I have plant-based, chicken nuggets. I have plant-based, everything is plant-based, right? And I don't have a problem, having these items delivered to my home via Instacart. And, so for me, it's accessible. But there are many communities that, they don't have Instacart, right? They don't have a local Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. And where they do go and shop, they don't have plant-based options, right? They're having, they've got the typical chicken. They've got the typical hamburgers, these mass produced items from Purdue and from Tyson's. And so I think that accessibility is a real concern when it comes to food justice, when it comes to veganism, right? It's two sides of the same coin when you really think about it.
Yeah, well, and I think that leads to, because people will come up with arguments as to why being vegan is difficult. And there are many arguments as to why being vegan is very difficult for some people. And this leads to the arguments that veganism is elitist.
Mm.
We had somebody on, this woman, Chef Cola, and she does all this work in Zimbabwe. And she was making the point that she started out being vegan in a very elitist place. She was working in a restaurant in Cape Town, and a very high-end restaurant.
Right.
And then she started moving towards doing much more community-based work, and she makes